Good morning to all. I am Sterin Jose, joining from Applied Systems Engineering office in Campbell. And I have Larry Price, who will be presenting this webinar for us. And to introduce him, he is a field engineer and sales engineer in electric, oil and gas and water, wastewater markets. He has 25 years of network communication experience. And he has also worked in industrial SCADA environment, including distribution automation, automated metering, and smart grid initiatives. Presently, Larry Price is a sales engineer, support engineer, and a technical trainer for ASE, and he has conducted a lot of training programs for ASE2000 test set communication software. So with this, I am passing the control to Larry Price. Hi, Larry. You may take over now.
Hello. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Today's webinar is covering ASE2000 version 2 test set. We're going to discuss version 2 upgrade benefits. A little background on Applied Systems Engineering, or ASE. We were founded in 1982, began consulting in industrialized and the electric utility industries, created our first protocol test set in 1989, which was a DOS-based application. And across our product lines, we have about 100 protocols that we support and counting, and are currently a DMP3 executive committee member. We were acquired by our parent company, Calcatech, in 2014. And Calcatech has a vast number of protocols that they support and have developed over a number of years in European and Asian markets, as well as other operational areas across the world. There's some new version or features in the version 2 test set that differ from version 1. We introduced the task-based operation mode, which simplifies some of the testing options available. There's a RTU simulation feature, which we'll get into here briefly, but it's a much more user-friendly environment for point simulation, creating error conditions while testing, as well as provide some enhanced monitoring options. Version 1 had a stationary display, not a lot of flexibility in the test environment to look at different data sets. And we've since taken some user feedback and offered some additional options. Under task mode in the version 2 test set, you'll see a bit of a difference in the overall appearance of the display. Tasks are grouped according to the protocol that you have selected for your test environment. And tasks are grouped together by logical functions such as static scans, issuing controls. You would have, under your control section, you would have select before operate, direct operate options, etc. And all of this is protocol dependent, of course. And it eliminates the need for protocol expertise and allows users to select pre-populated tasks and doesn't require a lot of advanced operator use to issue controls and implement differing test scenarios. And the message format is automatically defined and enables you to send, view, and monitor responses. Under RTU simulation, we have the ability now to link control actions to inputs. So in the case of a relay or some other device with an actual control point, you can map the output point to an endpoint point on your RTU simulation to validate and verify that control operations are received. We can also perform point simulation live real time during testing with a master station in the case of an RTU simulation. And then we also have the ability to trigger events and write to a log file, which I will show you here shortly in a live demonstration. And digital, analog, and counter values can all be defined and sorted based on your display preferences. A little bit about the enhanced monitoring options. A much more flexible layout, as I stated before. Users can manipulate the screens where it best fits their preferences. We also have a message filtering option. A quick highlight on that. The communications exchanges as they're received real time can be filtered based on user criteria. We have a drop-down menu or a checkbox that you can select to target specific messages, elements, or objects that you're looking for when performing advanced analysis of outstations. Or in the case of a master station, you can generate individual responses and determine how that is being processed by that master station. And then one other change that we made was the line monitor view. Instead of having a line monitor raw view, in addition to a regular line monitor view, it's all been combined into one display where raw information is displayed, or the bit or byte or hex values are displayed on one side, and the actual interpreted messages displayed on the adjacent side. And I'll show you that during my demonstration and highlight some additional capabilities with that. The ASE2000 test set version 2 is a 32 and 64-bit capable application that runs on Windows versions Vista all the way up to Windows 10 presently. You can perform master simulation and outstation simulation, both with the tool. It supports RS-232 and Ethernet TCP/IP as well. Bit and byte protocols are supported with our test set, and we cover a multitude of standard and legacy protocols. And presently, it's the de facto standard worldwide and used across a variety of industries presently. Version 1 test set users may be familiar with our USB BCOM here displayed in this photo. This is one of our options for hardware licensing the application. The BCOM interface is still supported with version 2 and still very much necessary in today's testing environments across CADA, because PC manufacturers no longer build serial ports on their machines without a special order. And even if you had a serial port provided on your PC, certain legacy bit protocols are not supported, and you would need a hardware device to emulate proper signaling. It's a USB powered device, supports RS-232. You can utilize a RS-485 adapter, and in addition, we provide diagnostics LEDs, which is instrumental when it comes to debug and troubleshooting, because in certain scenarios, even though you've defined a configuration for testing and it appears that you're actually sending information to a destination device, without LEDs, it's very challenging to determine whether or not you're actually sending the message was received. And these LEDs are pretty handy in identifying communication setup scenarios where a parameter may have not been defined correctly, or it can support a conclusion where a device received a perfectly defined message and it's not responding accordingly. And another hardware licensing option is our USB dongle. That's a dongle for plugging right into your USB port. The BCOM is not necessarily required, and certain end users that are only testing on Ethernet environments often choose that option only. It's smaller, it's portable, and it's just easier for them to use and keep track of. These hardware licenses are interchangeable. You can share them amongst multiple users. The ASE2000 test set can be installed on any machine, version 1 or version 2. And with the hardware licensing model that we provide, you can share those licenses across those users. Any questions presently? Okay, looking, don't see any questions. There's some additional file import and export options with version 2 of the test set. Captured communications can be saved in a Monex file, which I'll show you here shortly. And we also have the ability to take points list or point view list and export those into CSV files for editing, sharing with technicians and engineers, and then importing. And then we have also added the file query capability, so you can search across message exchanges for particular sequences, errors identified by the source device ID or destination ID or object type, etc. And then in addition to that, we have third-party data file import, export capability. And many IT users presently in the SCADA realm use Wireshark to identify anomalies on Ethernet network segments. And the output of the Wireshark file can be imported directly into the test set. And one key advantage here is not only can you communicate with those IT professionals that have no protocol expertise, but you can take the information provided by them in reference to your SCADA environment, import that into the tool, and it parses out or eliminates all the TCP/IP wrappers and specifically displays protocol information or protocol-based exchanges. And then in addition, we have some exchange editing enhancements in the exchange mode of operation that our version 1 users are familiar with. And now I'll show you a live demonstration of the ASE version 2 test set.
While we load the ASE2000 test set, I would like to point out that if you have any questions, please feel free to post the same into the questions or chat box in the webinar so that we can answer them. Thank you. Please continue, Larry.
So I've launched the ASE2000 test set, and the first time that you launch version 2, this is pretty much what you would see on your screen. And I have some buttons down on the lower left-hand corner I would like to point out. There is a master simulation quick hotkey or button that you can press. We also have the monitoring option here. We also have the RTU simulation option. And what would be new to most of you is this RM or remote monitoring option. It's only applicable to the ASE SPT series of our product, but essentially what it does is it provides you the ability to remotely connect to any IP based target as long as you have Ethernet connectivity, and you can run the test set as if you were locally present. So the key advantage there is you do not have to mobilize to a remote site to determine the root cause of a communication problem or some sort of failure condition. You can perform all testing from your desk or office location. On the upper left side, we've got some control operations I'll highlight here briefly, but the task mode of operation is selected by the menu up top, the mode of operation. And once in task mode, you have to define your RTU definition or the parameters of the device that you're going to test. So I would simply right click in this area, configure the RTU option. And here's a list of different test parameters that I performed across different RTU types. You have a name field, which is locally significant only. And then you have your protocol option, and the protocol options listed are going to be specific to the hardware licensing that you presently have. If you're licensed for only 3 protocols per your original purchase, only those 3 would be listed here. And today's demonstration will be utilizing the DMP3 protocol. So once you select your protocol, you define your outstation ID. And using our RTU wizard, it guides you through the rest of the process. You can define your point types. You have multiple options available, either in single bit or double bit format. And today I'm going to utilize single bit analog inputs. You can define your point index and range, 10 analog inputs. Add 10 binaries. Now, depending on the actual point type, you can reutilize sequences as long as the point types are different. We often get asked about that. Under DMP3 simulation for master simulation operation, it's not necessary to create the point list. You can actually directly interrogate the target device to retrieve that information. However, I wanted to display how you define your RTU database. Task mode is based on task groups and task sets. And here we have initialization tasks, static tasks, specific counter task. You also have the option to read time and date information or perform time synchronization services or controls. And then under our direct operational control task group, you have the DMP3 applicable options available: select before operate, direct relay, etc. And we also support file operation commands. We can read, write specific to specific files based on criteria such as the directory. You can define in this smaller window user authentication parameters, the name, password, the actual file name, etc. And DMP3 supports secure authentication. I'm not going to go into a great amount of detail on secure authentication, but we support version 2 and version 5 secure authentication testing. Each group might have a sub window here to allow you to define additional parameters. And for those of you that are not fans of the vertical type columns or necessarily tasks listed by grouping, you can define exactly what you want, modify your parameters to make it more user-friendly based on your circumstances. Also in the enhancement with version 2, we've added some options for display. So presently I have a blank message window that is defined by all of these view options I've checked up here. I'll walk through these. Under scripts and test procedures, we have the ability to import existing scripts with the tool. Existing scripts presently include DMP3 certification scripts. And to view those, you would simply use the file import option, point it to your directory, find the applicable script, level 1, level 2, and these are all DMP3 specifics published scripts. Once you select that, it will populate with that predefined script. And then based on my operators up here, I can actually commence that sequence and then view the responses from the device under test. And it saves the results. You basically take those results, export them, and then if you were going through official certification process with dmp3.org, it would review that. And there's some additional options available, such as getting your device listed as a conformant on their website, etc. You can also define custom scripts. So if I were to go in and define a existing script that covers all my testing needs, and you'll have to forgive me here because I have a small window in my lower right-hand side, but I can add elements, a particular sequence, add objects, etc. Data link example, send data link, replace the element, then take this information and save that and export it. Your workspace generally will be fairly consistent. If you're using a similar RTU definition for most scenarios, you can take this information presently and simply do a file, save as, and my project will be saved to the location of my choice. Get right to that directory. And then I could take that existing testing profile, share that with other technicians and engineers in my group, and save them the time of having to walk through and manually define their RTU database. The other option here is to define event tables. So from the master simulation side for binary, I could define specific states and define the alarm mask. And I will actually do that or demonstrate that during a live point simulation. So let's walk through some of the additional viewing features. You also have a message filter over here, which once I populate with traffic, I'll show you some of the options there. There's the message filter view, the point list view, which some of you are familiar with. There's also the line monitor view, which is up here, which will, once populated, I'll show you some information on that. And then the messages view. These three are the most popular views to be used in task mode. They show basically all of the information, both raw, interpreted, and the entire communication exchange sequences between source and destination device. You have an event log option here. Once you define all your triggers, this is the information that will be displayed in a file that you can locally write to. This is a similar feature to version 1 of the test set. Version 1 test set, all captures were saved to a file that had a designated file size parameter that you could define. And up top, we also have the script editor, which I showed you. Under the tools in the properties section, we have our communication parameters that we can define, the direction to RTU or target, as well as the from location or master option. You can toggle these. So if you previously defined it, don't have live communications, you can simply stop the simulation, toggle these values, and then begin again. It just saves you the time of having to navigate back to the communications tab and make those changes. In addition to the communication properties, you have display property options available. Most of this is very straightforward to you users. You can display millisecond time, for example, RTU response time, or last bit sent versus first bit received. And then I'll talk about checking the enabled exchanges only when I'm in exchange mode, but this is specific to exchange mode. And then under point simulation, you have the ability to define formatting, bits, bit lengths, raw units, etc. And then under our event variables, my event, or when an event condition is defined and triggered, I can either log it, simply display it, have an audible alert. And then there's some additional events for the exchange, communication errors. The options are the same through these choices. And then this is what we call the protocol specific tab. Had I defined a different RTU protocol, different options would be applicable based on that protocol. Here we've got the option under simulation to define RTU options such as internal indicators. I can generate failure conditions, quality flags, etc., using some of these parameters. And then we have default variation options that can be changed. And for today's simulation, I will use a source address of 1. And then if I were to be testing secure authentication version 2 or version 5, I would have some options here. And then the key is to make sure my line properties are the same. 9600. And then up on the upper right-hand side, this is our timeline, which is used for real-time display of communication signals. Like the BCOM unit, this is a device troubleshooting aid or an application troubleshooting aid. You'll see live traffic here shortly. It simply will tell you when you see a carrier signal detected and a RTU response. It's a fairly good indicator of when you're trying to identify setup discrepancies or understand why a device is either not responding or you're getting some sort of error result. So I've defined my initial RTU preferences. I'm going to launch another simulation here. I'm utilizing a BCOM today, communicating with another session. And here I would select RTU simulation. As you can see, based on the protocol, the options are the same. One item to point out, or one thing to note, is when you anytime you open the test set, the previously known working configuration will be displayed. This saves you some setup time if you're setting up a device on one side and attempting to match it with the other so you can establish communications. I define RTU simulation. It's listed up here, as well as the mode of operation, task mode. And then here's my point list view. On my point list view, I have some different options available. The name field and description field, which are locally significant. It's not going to populate the device database with this information. And I can enter raw values. I also have the ability to scale. I could, under my point options, I could actually add some scaling options here and see either raw or see both raw units and engineered units. You've got a qualities timestamp. You've got or a quality field. There's a timestamp field, upper and lower limits that you can define for analogs or binary states that you can define for binary inputs. And then you have the ability to increment or toggle points. So in the case of a binary, a one value would be would tell it to toggle on or off. So every successful scan and poll response would result in a transition. And then in the case of an analog, I have the option to add the increment value. So in this case, it should increment by the number I specified each successful read. So I can start my simulation. The timeline up above shows no signals, which is what I would expect until I begin my master simulation. And then you have the option for task frequency and task here. The controls up here are to run consistently or constantly. So the start would tell it to perform an all static data scan continuously. The target device would be 22 or station 22. So I could send that information once. And then some of you and version 1 users will be familiar with the line monitor view. Here on the left-hand side, we have the actual raw information being transmitted, and then what we call the interpreted field. So if I highlight specific areas in my message, I can identify where in that sequence they are, such as qualifiers, actual point information and data values, etc. Under my point list view, if I were performing live simulation, which is what I am, I should see my point list toggling. And we've got the messages view. Let's go over here. And let's go back to continuous. And here you can see on my master simulation, I'm receiving real-time point toggles as they occur. So real-time, I can change this information. And I should see that information corresponding on the other side. A handy feature is it will highlight the fields as the value change is detected. As I said before, in task mode, a little more simplified. If I want to inject a quality flag, you'll also see that from your master, or should see that from your master. Any questions on this presently? Let me do see a question.
No, Larry. You can proceed.
Okay, I thought I saw a question there. We stop my simulation briefly.
Larry, we have one question. It is so one customer is asking, what are the benefits? So to summarize, yeah, we are going through the entire presentation, and we might have some conclusions there, right? So do you want to address that question now or later?
I could answer it now, and then we could circle back to that here toward the end of the demonstration. But one of the key advantages is simplified task groups. The fact that you already have pre-populated options here. I will show you exchange mode, and you'll see some of the efficiency with this versus exchange mode. Exchange mode is a little more tedious. Version 1 test set users presently use an exchange list to identify an actual communication exchange type. And then there are additional parameters they have to populate. The time involved to define that and the overall process is very tedious. It lengthens the overall time to set up for testing, and it requires a lot of interpretation and know-how. And we get a lot of questions on that still. And the version 2 test set simplifies all of that. There's some enhancements with the exchange mode of operation that I'll show you here shortly. And from a user experience, my personal experience, I find task mode much more efficient in the case where, let's say I go out in the field and I'm providing field services, I can quickly set up my RTU parameters, define the communication sequence that I want to send to it, and test really quickly and identify a few things rather quickly, which would be, is the device receiving the message? What am I sending to it? How is it responding? You have all of that ability with version 1, but the overall time involved for engineering that test is it's at least double of what you would experience using task mode. So hopefully that answers your question.
And Larry, there is one more question on the Wireshark file loading into ASE2000. So are you planning to present that part?
I am planning to present that part. The demo today is serial based, but I can show you that here shortly.
Okay.
So one of the other options that you have available in the version 2 test set are some file capturing options. So I could go in and in this area up here, this field up here, I can actually add a file capture name. So 7 May. And then a maximum number of entries. This is a cyclical file, which means first in, and then once it exceeds the maximum limit, it would start to overwrite that original entry or the first entry. And this is the maximum number of entries specifies at messages. So if I were to start that, hit start, begin my communication sequence. And this button up here, I often connect it. It's not required, but if you had a scenario where you possibly have unsolicited messages, you want to maintain that persistent connection across your communication segment to ensure you receive those. Clear all my messages. Stop. Let's let's generate some traffic really quickly. Stop. Now I have the option of exporting everything buffered in my work session. The last 400 messages will be displayed in that file. If you need a larger file, that's where this file capture option is going to be handy or useful. I could stop my capture. I could actually look at the capture. And as you can see here, I generated 48 messages. This is in both directions. So for 24 out, 24 in. And then I can take this file. I can export this information, share this with other users. The other user on their end would receive this file, import, an email, and then they can desktop.
I think it is RTU 33 you just served.
Yeah.
Modification.
And then one of the other enhancements with version 2 that we didn't have with version 1, there were scenarios with version 1 users sharing files where during the import process, they would experienced some sort of error. We didn't necessarily know if it was related to the operator or something specific to the file. So we added some additional information to be viewed when you're importing to know whether or not there's actually information present, what the protocol is, the software version, build code for your test set. This is very useful when we are troubleshooting those types of scenarios. And then as you can see, it imported all of that information into my workspace. And if I were to go through and look for a particular sequence, I have options here to create a new message. Let me move my window that you can't see. And then we have different options available. I can use internal indicators. I could select a specific direction. I could also, I have additional element and object properties, specified values, point types, or group IDs, group types. And I could actually just target specific destination or sources in desired exchanges I want to see and show the results. You also have the ability during most sessions to find specific messages. And then you can repeat that through your entire exchange until you find your target communication sequence. So for Wireshark, the question regarding Wireshark is, if I had a Wireshark file, which would look like this information here, as you can see, some of the information is parsed out. Wireshark allows you to basically drill down to specific fields and see what actually was sent. But this is not entirely useful for SCADA engineers and technicians. But I do have the option in the Wireshark test set to export. RTU XYZ. And then there are different file suffix options that you can select, and we support PCAP and PCAP-NG files for import. And on the test set, regardless of my present scenario, which it's specific to serial, I'm going to import just communication messages, file, import, communication messages, and over here I have the option to import MSGX files. MSGX files are version 2 files. We also can import Wireshark files. We've added text file support for older legacy protocols that don't follow necessarily common formats. And our SPT series product has a specific capture file that we can import here. And so for Wireshark files, let me redo this for us. Let me import that file. File, import. There's a discrepancy, and I'm not sure what caused that. Let me go over here. That's how you would import that information. I might have some sort of, might be pointing to the wrong file. So information would populate there. Under exchange mode, in the interest of time, I'm going to keep going. Once in exchange mode, you have the ability to define selected exchanges based on the protocol that you've opted for. This is very similar to what you see in version 1 of the test set. So file, select protocol. If I needed to change that, I would do that in this method, using this method. File, select protocol, No. DMP3 serial. DMP3 LAN WAN and DMP3 serial are identical in message format. So the methodology here would be the same, with the exception of IP information being specified in your test. So for version 1 test set users, this would look very familiar. Under tools and properties, if I weren't running an actual sequence just yet, I would go in here and for display, select enabled exchanges only. And then presently what is showing me now is it'll display any of these commands, and it does this by default. But if there was a specific sequence I desired, I can simply clear them out, add in what I wanted. So we might have a link status request, might want to add a binary input scan, might want to add analog input, such as my example. And then you either click over here or double click on the cell. And here you have the option to simply display it as it's seen during the communication sequence. I can transmit. So in this case, I would actually transmit an analog input request. You have some additional fields for RTU simulation. And I can specify a destination, source ID, and then additional object properties here, or I could click right here. And here I could specify information such as a range of points. Range of points. Sorry, my mouse is not cooperating. Okay, or in the case of generating a response to a master station request during RTU simulation, I can inject some quality codes or failure codes. And then here I simply have display or transmit. It's going to repeat that every 2 seconds. And I can continue this with these other listed exchanges. So in the case of simulating multiple RTUs, a scenario where you're testing multiple RTUs from, say, a single master, I would want to have different destination IDs specified. So I can simply copy these, paste, modify, and repeat. But each exchange will have to be flagged for transmit, and then the regular interval would have to be specified. I can send these. Any questions on that? This should be fairly similar to version 1, but I find the overall menu to be a little more friendly, a lot more efficient. The copy paste option is extremely handy rather than going through each exchange, clicking, adding. It shortens the actual setup time, test time. And that's Wireshark. Advanced monitoring, we do have support, as I said, for Wireshark, additional file capture options. And I see a question. Are there any questions? Looks like there's one. I'm trying to expand my.
Yeah. So Larry, I think we have passed 15 minutes. So if you would like to cover any additional slides, we can do that and then come to the questions. Yeah.
Certainly. Really quick, some other features just to highlight the Wireshark capability. SPT users or other hardware users can now remotely run the test set. We have the ability to script and import, not only create manual scripts, but we support DMP3 certification for our DMP3 users out there. File operation sequences. Let's see what else. Version 2 test set can be downloaded for free. You can utilize version 1 and version 2 test set on the same machine. And version 1, additional consideration is version 1 development has ended. That ended sometime back, and version 2 is presently comes with 1 year warranty from date of shipment for new purchasers. That provides you with support mechanisms, dedicated support, and you're also entitled within that 1 year time frame access to any enhancements, fixes, etc. that are available. And most importantly is version 2 is free for you to review and try out on your own. We encourage you to download that. Check it out.
Larry, we have a few questions. First one is there a specific scenario in which we should use exchange mode or task mode? That is one question we have here.
And yes, there is. In a scenario where I would be testing multiple RTUs, I would recommend that you use exchange mode. You can simulate multiple RTUs under task mode. It's a little more, it's a little obscure because you'll have additional fields displayed. Let me show you this real quick. So if I go to task mode, and oh, by the way, I can actually save these exchanges, and this will be in a Monex format. So in a one-to-one scenario, I would generally recommend using task mode. It's a more simplified, quick and efficient setup. But for exchange mode, as I demonstrated, you would, or exchange mode, you would use the exchange list to identify all those different communication sequences and specify your different outstation destination IDs or destination IDs. But in task mode, I could select an additional RTU simulation. Hit finish. Give it a second here. And then once I start it, I would have an additional tab. Oop. I'm sorry, this is for an RTU simulation. And where's my tab at? But for RTU simulation, task mode would be fine if you were simulating multiple RTUs communicating to the master. But for a master testing multiple RTUs or outbound communications, this would be more ideal for scripting and sequencing this information, such as the example I provided previously. Next question.
Yeah, there is a question on hardware. So the question is, do I need a new hardware to run version 2?
You do not. The present hardware licensing options, be it USB BCOM or USB Sentinel, and I do believe we still have some PCM CIA users, you would use the firmware license updater to load either a new license, or you would simply request a trial license for running version 2 of the test set. One additional feature that I glossed over was version 2 test set users can capture communication exchanges and then export that information into a file and send that to non-licensed users that can download either our message viewer from our website, which is free to download, or they can actually download version 2 of our test set. And it's simply a stripped down version of the tool that would provide a message view for them to parse out the information that you captured during your testing. So it doesn't require third parties to buy or procure our tool, and allows you to easily exchange this information for sharing and coordinated debug and analysis, such as you might have an issue with a particular RTU and want to share that information with the RTU manufacturer, and all of those protocol specific exchanges would be displayed on their screen, and they would be able to see exactly what you see as a tester. Next question.
Yeah, next question is on the DNP3 certification testing. The question is there to perform DNP3 certification testing?
Yes, we have information in the test set. We have the entire manual is presently part of the installation, and we have supplemental information that we could provide users for defining scripted operations or utilizing the DNP3 certification script.
Okay. And we have another question on the detailed training of ASE2000 test set. The question is, how do I find out about training classes and availability?
For training classes, we recommend you contact sales at ASE or directly inquire via our website. We have some openings the remainder part of the year, but the sooner that we're contacted, the better we can coordinate and answer or fulfill any requests.
There is one more question, which is on the running multiple tasks in the task mode. So the question is, in task mode, can we run multiple tasks?
You can run multiple tasks. So, oh, I'm sorry, not in task mode. So in task mode, it's more singular focus for specific tasks. You can't sequence them. However, if you had more than one operation desired, you could manually select those individually, but it's more singular in scope. And that's where that is a scenario where exchange mode of operation would be more beneficial. You could define all of those tasks in sequence, by interval, etc.
And Larry, we could also change the exchanges dynamically in the new version, right? That also would be an advantage of
That is
using.
correct. Real time while testing in the exchanges, I can edit, modify, and generate those communications either outbound or as a response to a master scan or request.
Yeah, I think we are running out of time, so it's almost 1 hour.
We are.
So, yeah.
Well,
So for the additional questions, I think we can answer them separately to the centers, and yeah, probably in the interest of time, shall we wind up? Do you have anything additional to specify at this point?
Just real quick, thank you very much for your time. I know that there's a lot of different features that I glossed over rather quickly. I do encourage you to take a look at version 2 of the test set. As I said, it's free to download and for you to review and evaluate, determine if those enhancements are going to better benefit you in your test environment. If you have any additional questions, please let us know. We'll be happy to provide a follow-up or any amplifying information for any questions that may arise. Thanks again.
Okay, so with this, we will wind up the webinar, and thanks for joining, and also see for new webinars in our website. So to take your time to log in and see what all things are coming up. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you.